Right under an ID number, whether it's an IETF or whether it's an IETF or the threat. If you had a port block, you could
Okay, Mickey's hand is pointing to the top of the clock. Let's come on in, guys. Okay, so you've all seen the note well, right? You memorized that? Can you repeat it back to me? Good. So the agenda I've changed the agenda a little bit to reflect what we did on Tuesday. And actually, the last conversation that we had on Tuesday morning was about happy eyeballs. And we had one more conversation that Jordy would like to have relating to happy eyeballs. Ideally, they would have happened together. They didn't. Huh? You mean my voice isn't anyhow? But okay. So in any event, so I'm going to put Jordy on first, just to continue that conversation.
Who's on first?
Huh?
Who's on first?
Jordy.
No, second.
Huh?
Just kidding.
So that's what, or anyhow. But okay, so we've got 2 hours. We've actually got 5 conversations, and so I'm going to ask people to not take half an hour. I think actually several of these are pretty short conversations, and that will take care of itself. But just be aware of time, please. So that's where we're at. That's what we're doing. Does anybody have any last-minute agenda bashing they want to do?
Some free time, we have the basics on the draft, so make it just
well, if we have time. But there's a reason we have a draft cutoff, and like, guys, so Jordy, you may want this.
Okay, let's go straight. We have already on Tuesday the discussion on the update of happy eyeballs, and one of the comments that I was doing in the list is the bad thing of happy eyeballs is that it's hiding the problems that the operators may have in their networks. Okay, the problem may be in both sides, in the destination or in the source network. We know that. So I was suggesting why not including in this update of happy eyeballs a way to actually report that. Well, I was trying to figure out how to do that in a very, very simple way. My view on this is it could be already part of the happy eyeballs update document, but I understand that, and I agree, it's ready for last call, so probably we need to have it in a separate document. So I decided to write it down. I did very, very quickly, so it's a very preliminary version, but I think it's so simple that it may work. I just want to get the feedback. I asked it in the mailing list. I didn't get any response. I want to get the feedback if this is the right way, or if you think it can be done in another way, or we just do nothing about it. So I was thinking what protocol is common in the operators networks to get this feedback from the happy eyeballs, and I was looking at syslog. Most operators have some kind of syslog collector on their networks. So to make it simple, because syslog can be used in different ways, to make it simple, I was saying, okay, the default way for syslogs is using UDP, and the default port is 514. So just get it fixed for that way. And the point is how to inform every host that is running happy eyeballs about what is the address of the collector. And I was thinking, okay, why not doing the same way as NAT64 is doing to look for the network specific prefix, okay? So take advantage of that. So we don't invent new protocols, we just use existing things. And that gives us 96 bits, but we need 128 bits for defining a host. So I was thinking, what address in internet is free because we have not any usage of it, so it will not conflict with anyone. and is the older 624 anycast prefix, okay? So with that, we have a 128 bits address or even a full 24 bits prefix for doing that, in case you want to have several anycast collectors. And well, that's what I did. As said, it's a short document. It's not having any new protocol, just using existing things. I think it's quite simple to implement because it's just having in the happy ables a reporting algorithm that is using just plain UDP, nothing special. I don't think you need to implement a full 6-log, let's say, protocol. Just sending this short packet. And the good thing is that the operators might decide if they want to use it or not. If they want to use it, well, they get the information and they can take care of that or not. That's again a decision of the operator, but at least they can keep track that something is happening in his network, especially if they get towards the same destination, always failures, okay? So they can solve the problem if is in their network, or they can inform the destinations that there is a problem on that path. So what I am asking in the document is that the happy ables should just use the 6-log reporting algorithm, and that's it. The idea again is that the operator should take care of that. There was a question here is, basically, we want to do this reporting with both IPv4 and IPv6. At the moment in the document, I am only doing the reporting with IPv6. So if the access link to the 6-log collector is broken, which IPv6, it will not get the reporting. One easy possibility to solve that is to send two messages, one with IPv4 and one with IPv6. So even the operator can correlate that and can solve one more problem, which is having failures on his access network. Okay, so that can solve two problems instead of just one. One of the comments, I am not sure it was in the list or it was in private, I don't recall right now, is about privacy issues. Okay, in the actual document, I am suggesting to send the source prefix and the destination address. So yes, there may be some correlation of data to know that this user is actually going to this destination. But actually, I was thinking about that, and just sending the destination will be enough. Okay, because sending the destination, we already know that there is some problem going to there, and the operator can do their own measurements to see if it's a general problem on his network. And I think that will solve the privacy issues if we believe that this is really a privacy issue. In the document, of course, I need to request Diana to reserve that prefix again for this document. And well, the question I mentioned before, if we want or not to integrate with the happy ables update, probably it depends on if the people like the idea and we move very fast, then it may be done. Otherwise, just keep it as two separate documents. And I think that's it, basically.
Okay, so I see Eric coming to the mic. Let me stick in before he gets there. I think this draft actually is two separate things. One of them is that you'd like the Happy Eyeballs draft to issue with syslog. The other is let's define syslog. And you think that's ops area?
Yeah, ops area.
So I'd really like, if you want to continue this draft, break it into two things, and maybe one of them actually belongs in his draft if we decide that. But the definition of syslog is not this working group. No, well, that's probably ops area.
But I am not actually defining 6log again or anything like that.
Yes, you are. You've got an IANA request for an address.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just for the collector, for the collector
address. You're defining syslog for the collector. And that needs to go wherever syslog goes.
Okay.
Okay, because it's a general tool that anybody using syslog would use.
Okay, so you are suggesting that this way of making finding the syslog can be used for many other tools.
For any use of syslog.
Actually, we have an ops area AD on the line. Maybe he can comment.
So
Warren?
hey, ops area AD, run to the front of the line.
He was not paying
A
attention.
glorious AD.
Yeah,
I mean,
We're-
there we go.
we're both feeling squeamish about asking for a UDP port for syslog. That probably belongs in the working group that owns syslog.
Port or address? Address. The
Pick
port,
one,
the port is the
pick one,
standard
I don't
It's the normal
care.
port.
Okay, the thing is that we don't define protocols.
I don't.
Our charter says
Yeah.
don't define protocols.
Somebody owns syslog.
I don't view this as changing syslog or defining protocol. I view this
Exactly.
as asking for an address. I'm not sure I view it as a good.
Adding an address
That's
to it.
different.
It's adding an address to it.
It's saying, this is an address you might want to run syslog on it. We can have this fight later, but I don't think that's changing syslog. I think that's asking for a generic assignment of an
Okay,
address
but
and suggesting.
however you want to phrase that, it will be available and useful for other uses of syslog, not just
Useful.
this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It's useful for other. Yeah.
So Eric Vink, just wondering whether it's really the intention to send the syslog to the access provider. I'm not sure whether it will get incentive to fix the issue. I think some issue with API Ball are on the remote side, on the server side. And then I would imagine something like, oh, I failed, I need to fall back to IPv4. Then I'm sending a x-API Ball fail, : something into the HTTP header.
I was thinking on that, and the reason I believe it should be sent to the access provider is because if we send to the destination, it may be just a hosted web service, and nobody's going to take care of that. You understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. While if it's the access provider and he sees the same problem from different customers, he probably has some interest in contacting the hosting center or whatever, if it happens in different websites, but in the same hosting center. You know what I mean?
I understand. I'm not sure whether it will happen like this, but it's okay.
Andrzej Całetka, CESNET. First question, if you are using as a destination network-specific prefix discovered by RFC 7050, that means it only works in networks where DNS64 is deployed. If there is no net64, there is no network-specific prefix to discover, so discovery would fail, and then there is no destination for such reporting, which...
Of course, the way I am doing, using UDP, it means this only will work if the operator implements the collector.
Yeah,
that's the point.
But the problem is that there can be networks without net64, DNS64.
You don't need that.
And in that case, what prefix would be used for destination of those syslog packets?
You don't really need to have NAT64 or DNS64 in the network. You just need a DNS that is announcing the network-specific prefix, even if you are not using DNS64.
Okay. And this comes to the other question that I had. If you are, I would say, abusing the address for the anycasted 624 relays, which are still in operation, that means that if the provider will not take those syslog messages, they will go through these gateways.
No, I did that on purpose because the 624 anycast address was used only in IPv4. What I am using is the IPv6 address resulting from that.
Yes.
So nobody used the IPv6 address from the NSP plus the IPv4 624 anycast address.
But if there is net64 translation, it will translate this 6 address with network specific prefix.
That address is deprecated by an RFC already, so they should not be using that.
Okay.
That leap is no.
So Warren Kamari with no hats. It feels like this is immediately going to get turned into a DOS option, right? Like, oh look, open syslog stuff. I can fill up their drive with random crap. So you're going to have a big
Closer to
thing
the
in
mic,
security.
please.
Oh sure. You're going to have a big thing in the security considerations about, not running out of disk and not having people. Sure. Yeah. I mean, like you're just going to fill it up with stuff.
Mike.
Janelin Kova. I can see only very limited application with this, right? Okay, I personally might be curious what happening in my corporate network if I put clients and I control them, and I would like to know. But in this case, I probably prefer them to have it in their local disk and not to send all that stuff over the network to me. Because seeing just destination address, well, I see some clients having problem connecting to some, let's say, CDN or cloud, and what? I still need TCP dump and other stuff to troubleshoot, right? And I see, and just normal like access providers, I do not believe they're gonna do anything with this because they do not control the clients. Are they going call people and ask what kind of problem did you have last Friday connecting to that website? Rather unlikely.
David Skadazi, Apple. Could you go back one slide, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. So regarding these open questions, so for the first one, I don't want to open a rat hole on addresses and ports. Small suggestion, you could use a host name and just punt the issue down and be done with it, but that's super minor in my mind. The privacy issues, for me, are a big glaring red flag, because in the document in the privacy considerations section, you say that we send the source prefix and destination address, and then you say, so privacy issues regarding identification of a specific device or user are avoided. That's not the case. For example, at Apple, we really care about our users' privacy, and I'm sure the other device makers here agree. If your user is using, say, private browsing to browse the IETF website, for example, because they don't want to know what drafts they're watching, and something fails, you don't want a syslog message somewhere to be saying what they're actually, what website they're actually hitting. With the source prefix, you can identify who that was. So that's a very big problem in my mind. Regarding point number 4.
Just a minute. Do you think if we just send the destination, we'll still have privacy issues?
Yes, because that still tells you, tells like that syslog server and that permanent record what website I was accessing. No, and so if we could come up with a way to do this that is good for users' privacy, I think it's something we could consider. But for me, that is an absolute showstopper. Regarding point number 4, so I'm speaking as one of the authors of draft RFC 655-BIS, which is Happy Eyeballs v2. I don't think we should integrate this into that document. As we discussed at V6OPS 2 days ago, that document is heading to Working Group Last Call very soon. This document still has a lot of open questions, so I would rather they stay separate and go their separate ways. It's fine if if your document updates this one, but I don't think they should be in the same draft.
Hello, Tommy Pauly, Apple. I'm the other author on the Happy Eyeballs draft. So I think the issue of making a Happy Eyeball system understandable to the network, be able to understand the problems that are going on, I think that's a worthy goal. And so I like working on that. In general, the syslog solution does bother me for a lot of the reasons that have been brought up already. I think I had mentioned on the list, and I'd like to hear your thoughts more of how possible is it to do this more in kind of network observational heuristics? Because as we've discussed with some people, the patterns that you would see in a Happy Eyeball system should be somewhat recognizable. So let's say I try one connection to an address, and then I try another one, and one of them wins the race. The pattern of the packet traces would actually be somewhat predictable, right? Because either I send out a SYN, and nothing ever comes back, so it's half open, or the SYN-ACK comes back, but it's too late, and then the end host will send a reset immediately, and so that would be a flag. Or maybe the SYN-ACK came back, but it was still too late because they were closely raced, and then you would see essentially SYN, SYN-ACK, ACK, and then an immediate FIN. So if you essentially recognize these connections that are immediately reset or immediately dropped, that were done back to back from the same host, with another address family or another set of addresses, that would be a good indication of, maybe something's up. And that doesn't require explicit communication from the host. You already may have the information you need. So, what do you think?
Michael Abrahamson. So, while I like the overall goal of getting telemetry, because I think right now the device manufacturers have telemetry, and me as an operator, I do not. I think we should do it in a lot different way, like aggregate it more, have a reliable mechanism to deliver it to me, and so on. I think the overall goal is good. I think the mechanism proposed here and the addresses and so on need a lot of more work. So yeah, let's see what we can come up with together. It would be interesting to hear a bit about the strategies that device manufacturers are using for aggregating information, what information they're getting and their experience from that, and let's see if we can send that to the ISP as well, if we can identify the ISP, because that's not always so simple.
So if I understand correctly, it seems that the people like the goal of the document, but not the way we are doing, basically, yeah? Okay, so let's find another way. If other folks here have interest in working on that, please contact me, and we can try to figure out alternative ways to do that.
Sounds good.
Fine?
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
if you're interested on working on something, talk to Jordy. Okay, Bing, are you around?
Good afternoon. My name is Bing Liu. And this is an old document in this working group. This document was initially adopted about 4 years ago. And after some long debate and several round discussion, it was reshaped in last year as a new document. The main change is that we lower the level of the opinions from recommendation to considerations. And before last IETF, the chair in our working group asked people opinions on whether we should continue on this work. And the result was to continue it as an informational document. And hopefully we can make it done within this year. Another important suggestion from the chair was let others try to find some set of considerations which can get consensus in our working group. That's some brief background. And I summarized some comments that I believe can be considered as kind of representative of this working group. The one aspect of comments is regarding to the some redundant content of the document. Victor and Tim both suggested to condense the document to make it more concrete. And especially Victor suggested to focus on the following models: the isolated network, and he ranked it as a potential value use case, ULA only use case. And the multi-addressed is also potential value, but for the ULA with IPv6, this is harmful choice. Okay, the other aspect of the comment is about the ULA only deployment with IPv6. So I won't repeat all the comments. You can see that by yourself. So I think the consensus is explicit that people are mostly against that usage. So this is the latest version, the table of content. And we largely condensed the materials. Some analysis was simply deleted, and some was condensed and moved into the introduction section. So from the second three, we discusses the general consideration. The technical aspects doesn't change. And section 4 is the analysis and the considerations for the possible deployment scenarios, which are basically consistent with the suggestion from Victor. And apart from the three models, we also discussed several special use cases. And for example, the special routing. And the second one is actually the back to my Mac protocol specified by Apple. And we also give some considerations on the IPv6 coexistence deployment. So basically, the technical content doesn't change much. So I won't repeat all the details that has been discussed around and around in this working group. Okay, so to address the IPv6 use case, we now revise the text as this. This document doesn't consider the ULA with IPv6 or proxy as a good choice for normal case. Rather, this document considers ULA with provider aggregate addressing as a better approach. Hopefully, this can get consensus in our working group. Okay, after the 0.2 version posted, the chair asked some reviews, and Brian gave the thorough review, and we do expect more review. And our plan is to make another revision based on potential comments. And then we'd like to request a working group last call. Okay, any comment?
Okay, so do we have comments? Erica, what's up?
Medica Keo, I do have a comment because it kind of ties into a section in the draft that I'm a co-author on for V6 security. Because one of the comments in the last call was ULA still really, and also the recommendation to have very strong language that the IETF does not recommend use of ULAs. So I was a little bit surprised to see this draft being discussed, but I'm happy about it because I'm trying to figure out what language we want to finalize on in the security draft. And so I'd like to understand whether or not that language will be here in this draft. But thank you.
Okay, so let me stick myself in the middle here. To me, a EULA is a firewall rule implemented in BGP. I don't allow something to get to whatever system that is by not advertising the address. And that's the primary and perhaps only value of EULA. An example of a EULA in real operation, my T-Mobile telephone has a DNS server address that is a EULA. And I'm sorry, I don't see anything wrong with that. You know, if you would otherwise have a fire rule that says, please protect this device, not advertising the address of BGP seems like a good idea. So I don't understand the please kill EULA viewpoint. It has a valid use. Lorenzo, you may disagree with me now.
Yeah, on that specific point, I do disagree because it actually creates a false sense of security because anyone who has an adjacency to your network can send a packet to your EULA. And if you thought you were secure and you didn't have a firewall, you're now wide open. So that needs to go in this document as well. The fact that I don't advertise an address to you doesn't mean you can't send a packet if you're adjacent to me, or if you can arrange for a tunnel to something adjacent to me. So that's I think, something that needs to be clearly explained, because RFC, again, the draft does go into some detail about how it's different from RFC 1918. I think that's good. I'm not sure it sort of, I don't think it covers this, and this is a really important point. There is no security. I didn't like the idea that we will say that people have requirements for, the draft says that people have requirements for ULA plus NPTV6. Are we still talking about it? Like, you had an entire slide about how people like strongly disagree with that statement. Can we remove it? Because, you know, those people are still here.
Well, Lorenzo, your statement was that you wanted, that the thing that he quoted you saying was that you wanted a statement in there about NPTV6. You wanted him to actively say it was a bad idea.
Yeah. Does it not say that yet?
No.
Still?
Eric Klein. And I also agree that I like the clarification that ULA is not RFC 1918. I don't think that can be repeated enough. People need to understand that they are different. But yeah, the section 4.3 still says we don't consider ULA plus NPTV6 to be as good as other choices. Rather, the document considers other things to be better. It does not actually say not recommended. That's all it would take, is one sentence. This is not recommended. Preferably in all caps, which you use in the terminology section, although nowhere else in the document does there appear to be all caps language.
Yeah, this is simply because of the background. We lower the level of this document. We don't say recommend or not recommend.
No, that's a reason not to put all caps. You could use lowercase, but you can still say not recommended.
Tim Chan, can you go forward a slide? I think it's number 3. Yeah, so I agree with what Lorenzo and Eric are saying. I think it should clearly say not recommended. At the moment, that section is all wishy-washy and a bit vague. I think in the case of number 1, I know of universities where they're configuring their V6-only management networks using EULAs, and I say, well, you could use globals, and yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter, but not so bothered about that. Number 2, we know there's quite a few ISPs deploying EULA plus GUA in home networks, and there don't appear to be zillions of problem calls coming as a result of that. I know both Sky and BT in the UK are doing that, and that's 10 million residential networks. But yeah, number 3, we should clearly say not recommended. If it's not using 2119 language, then just say not recommended very clearly. And ultimately, this is an informational document. It's not BCP, so it's a little bit lower in terms of the recommendations here anyway, but say not recommended very clearly.
Thanks.
Ron Bonica, Juniper, no hats. I think this document can probably be condensed down to just a couple pages, and it could be summarized as follows. I'm going to follow the analogy you had of EULAs being domestic animals. You say EULA is a domestic animal. Don't route it. Don't let it wander around the house unless A, it's yours, or B, it's somebody else's and you recognize it. So it's a BGP policy, or maybe it's a firewall policy, but very short policy, and that's it.
Well, and that's already in the EULA definition document. Yeah.
So Victor Horsing, 2 points. One is, although I personally don't necessarily agree with the ULA plus NPTV6, I think that if we didn't mention it, it would make it ambiguous. And network operators know how to put things together. So I think coming out and saying this is in fact a case and don't do it is a lot more powerful if we feel that's a bad choice than not mentioning it all. If you don't mention it all, it makes it vague. And the answer is then we have no recommendation. And people will put that together.
It is mentioned.
It is, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It
So
was
let's keep it
mentioned
in.
in the draft. It is
Correct.
currently mentioned.
I agree. So I'm suggesting we keep it in. So we could say it's not recommended versus pulling
We
it
don't
out.
at the moment.
Fair enough. So we want to say, harmful choice recommended. Either language is fine with me. Fair enough. I just say that we should mention it if we feel that we want to make some statement to the negative about it, whether it's harmful, not recommend, or whatever that statement said, agreed before within the group. Yeah. Okay. That's the comment.
Lorenzo Colletti again. I think number one, I would like, in the case number one, I would like the draft to say that there are large deployments of isolated networks that use global space, and that in fact it is a perfectly valid way to use it, and it is way more convenient than rolling the dice every time you want a 48. So examples are like carrier IMS networks, or the massive FTTH deployment in Japan. That's a walled garden. That's all using global space. The Google data centers, I think Facebook uses their own global space. All of these things are using global space. And I think we need a clear explanation why it is not necessary to have ULAs just because of just because it's a large network that's disconnected. It's actually a lot easier to get public space if you have a large network. And ULAs do have to be generated on a 48 by 48 basis, unless you're doing something that's completely prohibited by our standards. So that also needs to be considered. You can't just, rolling the dice is inefficient, right? Because you end up with all these ULAs that, sure, if you only have one ULA deployment, you route FC00, you aggregate it, and then as soon as you have two, you have this patchwork of firewall rules where these things can't be aggregated because they're random. So it's actually not very useful.
Lorenzo, would you send your specific comments to the mailing list that I can have some further discussion and to check whether further revision can get consensus?
Tim Chan, Lorenzo's reminded us, when I have spoken to UK universities that are deploying, they aren't rolling the dice. They're generating their EULA in a way that they want to make it look. So I don't know what you say in the document at the moment about usage considerations, but there should be a very clear statement in there that if you use them, you should use them properly by rolling the dice and not crafting them to match your GUA subprefix or just using 00. I think that would be a useful thing to say in there. Yeah, but in an enterprise network, that's a small one. It's not a huge deal, but yeah. But yeah, that's another point. That's the reason for saying that. If you're going to merge or do something else, that's a problem. Second thing I would say is, we did have that really good talk yesterday by Marcus from Microsoft about his view of how they would solve the multi-homing problem without using MPT-V6 with the different prefixes and the PVD. So I think we should be putting a lot of effort into making that work, and just saying very clearly here about not doing that, not recommending.
Victor Coursing again. I actually kind of agree with Lorenzo's comment that mentioning that there's sometimes where you may have used a ULA where you could just use a GUA. That makes sense if we want to put it in there. However, I don't think that negates the fact that ULAs are useful. In terms of non-aggregable, there's a lot of security constrained devices and a lot of isolated networks, and sometimes isolated networks coexist inside a non-isolated network. There's management domains within large access networks that coexist in the routing domain as other devices, and et cetera. So I think there's still valid use cases for it. It's being used in production networks. You can actually create security rules that capture all the ULA space, and it takes care of a lot of things from a security perspective, especially in constrained devices, et cetera. So I don't think one negates the other, but I think mentioning the additional point could be useful. In terms of false sense security, yeah, that's a thing, unfortunately. But I don't think ULAs cause bad design. I think bad design practices where I think I'm private because I'm using ULA is just bad design, and those people can do those things. I don't think anything we're going to do is going to stop that. I think layered security is typically what good SPs do.
Marcus Keane. Speaking as an enterprise network operator, it's not unusual for customers to have an isolated network that then needs connectivity back to the corporate network at a later stage. So, we find it's far simpler just to delegate out of our PA space rather than sort of have to worry about that. So it makes it easier.
Okay, so do you have comments? So, okay, thank you. So, Jen?
Okay, let's speak about practical solution to the problem. I know we've been hearing about PVD the whole week, and I hope PVD will solve most of the problem when it comes. Meantime, I need something right here, right now. And the problem is, again, enterprise multi-homing on PI address space, right? And actually, there are two parts of the problem. One is how to send packets, existing packets which are already on the network to the right uplink, and how to tell host which addresses should be used, because some addresses might not be usable because there is no uplinks to send them, either because of failure or because of existing policy. And indeed, how to deal with various failure scenario. And indeed, we do not want to use NAT, right? So I was presenting 1 year ago in Berlin this enterprise multi-homing draft, which has been adopted by routing working group. And that document actually describes in many details general use case and general approach to solve that problem. A problem of sending packets to the right uplink is supposed to be solved probably with source address dependent routing. The problem of signaling back to host which address it should be using could be solved with influencing default address selection. But for general problem, when I have just complex topology, we rely on rule 5.5 of default address selection, and it's still not implemented in some operating system, right? So it's really hard to do it right here, right now, for like all those bring your own devices which might not support it. So I want, as I say, something tactical solution, not for every single possible scenario, but for some common use cases. So actually, I already have an ugly but working solution for sending packets where I want them to go. It's called policy-based routing or forwarding, whatever. Yeah, I know it's ugly, but it kind of works while I'm waiting for SADR to come. So now, how can we influence next source address selection on the host? Yeah, especially without rule 5.5. The obvious way I see is just to use the rule which tells do not use deprecated addresses. So again, I'm going to talk about a very simple but very common scenario when I have very simple topology with two internet uplinks. And let's say I have a small network which has two internet uplinks and only for internet access, right? So I'm not talking about situation when those hosts need to go to some special services and ISP network. I just need to go to internet. And normally those uplinks will be used either as active-active, when I do not care which exact uplink is used by particular flow, or in primary backup scenario, when I want normally traffic go via one uplink and the second uplink should not be used while the first uplink is operational. Yes, so scenario, yeah, there is a host which wants to download some pictures or video of kittens, because I was told every presentation should have kittens. And let's say there are two ISPs allocating two prefixes, /48 or /56, 48 preferable. So host has two addresses, right? And it should use green addresses if traffic is going through green uplink and blue addresses for blue uplinks. So as I say, we can just use policy-based routing on those routers. So make sure that if packet is from green prefix, we send it to green uplink, if green uplink is available indeed. And vice versa, all blue packets go into blue uplink. Sorry, if uplink is down, no luck, and we'll look into a failure scenario later. So if for some reason, either because of policy or because of network failure, particular uplink should not be used, it means that we do not want to host to use addresses from that prefix. And this, as I say, the most obvious way to tell host do not use those addresses is to deprecate the address. Great. We have arrays for this, right? Currently. So basically what I need to be able to change values in array based on the network state, based on something which is happening in the network. How I configure it currently? I just have prefix and preferred lifetime, default router lifetime. What I want to be able to say, if some condition is true. If my primary uplink is up, then I want this prefix to have non-zero preferred lifetime, and this router maybe be default router. And if something else happens, let's say uplink goes down, I want this prefix to be deprecated and this router not to be used as a default router. So basically, I want something which I called conditional array because we sending arrays and changing some fields in them based on some conditions. So what kind of conditions could it be? Use your imagination. My use case, which I have right now, is either interface state, similar to VRRP, right? I have a router, uplink goes down, I'm not a VRRP master anymore, goodbye. Or if your network topology is a bit more complex and there are more than one router, it could be presence of particular route in the routing table. Maybe just a route with particular attributes. Again, this could be made very complicated if you want, or it could be very simple in some simple scenarios. Which fields in array would be desirable to update? Obviously, preferred lifetime in PIO, and maybe router lifetime to indicate in multi-router scenarios that this router should not be default router anymore. Again, like VRRP. If network using VRRP already, it probably will be done automatically by VRRP switching mastership. But again, maybe some people might have other scenarios. So let's look at the example. First example, one router, two uplinks, one logical router. Okay, it might be actually two routers combined in one logical entity. Primary, backup uplink. So I want all my traffic to go through green uplink because it's cheaper, has more capacity, whatever. So in normal situation, when my primary uplink is up, I'm sending error. Router is sending array with two PIOs. One has preferred lifetime non-zero, and backup uplink is a prefix form. Backup ISP has preferred lifetime 0. Great. If primary uplink fails, now we're executing another else condition for green prefix. So green prefix gets deprecated, and a blue prefix is now getting preferred lifetime non-zero, so host will start using it. Obviously, existing connections, for example, within the network will still survive because incoming connections to deprecated address still supposed to be accepted. But for all new connections, blue prefix will be used. Active-active uplinks, actually even simpler, right? All prefixes could be used as long as uplink to ISP goes down, the corresponding prefix gets deprecated. Again, if it's simple topology, and again, I'm talking about my problem I have right here, right now, it's most likely small networks with very simple network topology. Yeah, you can easily detect uplink being down either because interface goes down or BGP session or some default route disappear or whatever. You can deprecate the prefix. Yeah, so green uplinks, uplink goes down, green prefix gets deprecated, hosts start using blue addresses to download for pictures of kittens. Two routers, yeah, it now getting slightly more complicated because now in normal scenario, a router 2 needs to know when something changed on router 1. Again, in this case, the obvious scenario would be using the presence of particular route on the routing table. So when everything is operational, green addresses are used because blue addresses are deprecated by default. And if green uplink goes down, router 2 should detect it because it has a condition if router 1 uplink exists in my routing table, and then start sending arrays with non-zero preferred lifetime, and probably also actually advertise itself as a default route, if it makes sense. Yeah, so similar active-active uplinks to routers, again, simpler, then because in this case, each router just needs to track its own uplink and deprecate the prefix upon the uplink failure, and probably also deprecate itself as default router, will make sense. Yeah, this is failure scenario for two uplinks. If you have complicated topology, yeah, now we need to do more complicated policy because first hop router doesn't have obvious knowledge of uplink state change, probably again, presence of uplink routes could be used as a trigger for changing arrays. Yeah, and then you can use again your imagination to make very complex and ugly configuration with this, but at least in some use cases I found quite common, it kind of works. Currently, unfortunately, you have to play with some automation on the router to do this. So I believe it would be really nice to get something like that implemented as a standard feature on a router. I have feature requests to some vendors to do this. So I would like to hear an opinion. Actually, thanks, Lorenzo, for suggesting to write in this based on the draft presenting and Berlin general use case for enterprise multi-home app. Questions?
So yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to implement this. It seems like what you're asking for is some kind of a rule in each router on each interface that says either I do or I do not have a route to ISPB. And if I don't have a route, I shouldn't be, I should zero the lifetime for that prefix as far as people using that address. Number one, is that what you're suggesting? Number two, what happens if I've already lost ISPB and now I lose ISPA? Am I saying don't use any addresses?
Okay. So yes, what I'm asking is, yes, instead of just, let me, so yeah, instead of just configuring some parameters of arrays, I want to have some policy applied. And in this policy, I want to say some conditions, right? And
okay, so policy is a magic word. How do you implement it?
to answer that question, I need to know how you in general implement this thing, right? And I do not want to make any speculations on this.
Okay.
So
May I cut in line here and take a guess? I'm suspecting the policy would be something like, if you have a route to this prefix, use source A. If you have a route to the other prefix, use source B. If you have a route to both, I'm not quite sure. And if you have a route to neither, pick one.
okay, so, and what we're gonna do if you do not have any internet connectivity, right? Here it's actually this depends on desired topology. If it's just one router or like very small topology and you do not really want intra-site connectivity in this case, right? Yeah, you just deprecate everything, right? If you want to have intra-site connectivity in this case, we might, Lawrence will hate me, we might use ULAs.
Yeah.
Or it actually, another case might be, because in this scenario, you might actually have a third prefix, which your corporate prefix, right? If it's like this, if it's just a small site belonging to a bigger network, right? You still might use your corporate prefix to have intra-site connectivity, and it would make sense because I probably still want something in my corporate DNS for intra-site to be used, but there is no internet connectivity, so it doesn't matter for local egress. So yeah, if you have third prefix, it might be the corporate prefix belonging to the company or ULA, you can use it, yeah.
Okay.
Tim Winters, UNHIOL. So I was thinking about the 2-hour rule for a host that they can't drop it if their time's over 2 hours. They can only drop it to 2 hours.
It's valid. It's valid lifetime. It's not preferred.
Okay. So my second question is why not route information options?
Because again, not I don't think all operating systems support RIO.
Okay, so that's about the support, not
yes, it's about support because again, it's tactical solution. I know PVD will do it much better.
Okay, thanks. David Lamputter. I totally support your approach. I will probably go implement it. I do know how I will implement it. Can you go back to the slide where you had on the left the triggers that can, yes. Earlier, I think? Yeah, the next one actually.
Next one.
Yeah. So all of the potential triggers that I can see will have some kind of impact on my routing tables. So the only thing I will do when implementing this as I think it is, I'll just go check whether for the prefix that is on the link, I can reach a address that is to be configured by the user for the purpose of testing whether this prefix is usable. So you could, by default, just have the empty address like zeros all there, which works fine for checking if I have a default route from the prefix that is on the link to the internet. It could also be something specific to the company if it's like a service that doesn't actually do internet, basically. And I think that is all that is needed in terms of policy to model 99.9% of the cases. However, I also agree that we probably need additional policy above that in terms of what to do when I run out of prefixes and I don't have anything on the link anymore and I'm not using ULAs and stuff like that. And that is a more complicated topic that needs more work and more specification.
Yeah, so. Because another option I'm just thinking maybe that if, you can say, okay, if it's the last, whatever, how we define last, don't deprecate it because there is no internet connectivity anymore. So we do not care about selecting the right one. So it's, I would like to hear your suggestions.
Okay, so I would, on my end, like to hear if anyone thinks that the policy on the triggers needs to be something more than checking in the routing table if from the prefix on the link, something specific is reachable or not.
Marcus Keane. Yeah, I think this is very useful of having the hook between, the RIB and ND, or RAs in this case. Just reading the draft, I think the one place that will run into trouble is with remote border routers. So I think if you're doing active-active, that might be a problem if the border routers aren't equidistant, where you might basically have hosts sort of load balancing to other hosts on the internet, but just load balancing between the two different sources, when actually one of the actual border routers is closer, and so it may not be actually using the correct source in that case. That's, I guess, a corner case.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Chang, I think it's interesting. I think it's nice that it's not requiring any host changes. But there's still going to be changes needed to routers to make it work. But to what extent, with the new netconf stuff that's been defined now and finally, I think, just about to pop out as an RFC, do you think that's likely to be adopted soon? And would something monitoring the network just be able to detect the outage and send the appropriate commands to the other routers to reconfigure themselves? Is that a viable approach in a type of enterprise network, or would you rather have the routers figure it out for themselves and talk to each other?
I would like the routers to do it themselves, because one of the scenarios I'm seeing, right, it's a small location, small site, right? It's just maybe one router there and nothing except few users and a printer, right? So I do not want to use any external automation, if it's what you're saying, right?
Not necessarily external, but I mean, this is, Phil Hallenbaker raised this in the plenary last night about having systems that can detect and.
Yeah, the problem is I probably could not deploy that system on site all the time, right? Because it doesn't scale. I cannot have this system somewhere in data center because that system will need to reach device quickly enough, right? It's the same like with pay multi-homing and DHCP-v6, right? It's introduce additional delay before you can signal everything back, and it might not be acceptable for users, right? Especially when your connectivity is unstable and you have hundreds of sites which the system need to deal with, right? So I'm not sure, I cannot see how it's going to work. I'm not sure it's going to work very well.
Okay.
Because the router will know anyway, right? Router does know that something happens with connectivity and it's closer to the end host. So it will be immediate, right? Array goes on.
I think it's great for us to document what works today in hosts that were shipped 10 years ago, because that's really the reality of what a network operator needs to do. They need to support hosts that shipped 10 years ago, and so it's super useful to have this written down. What we can, what we can't do, in which topologies it works, and which topologies it doesn't. I think for the triggers, I do wonder if there needs to be some support in some routing protocol. I mean, I know that the routing working group is working on SADR, I think, at least. I do wonder if we need really something in BGP as well for sort of larger scale networks that says, look, these prefixes are only valid. So more to the point, like, do we need something in BGP that communicates BCP 38 limitations, right? I will announce this to you, but it's only valid from these source prefixes. If you think about it. Well, if you're a stub, then
Yeah. I think we definitely need it, but yeah, it's more related to the first problem, how to send packets where, right? So
no, it would be the trigger here too.
So you mean BGP down? Yeah, maybe. To be honest, I did not think about this particular scenario because, again, I like coming to IETF. You go here, you come here, you talk about your problem, people listen, you feel better. So yeah, and my main problem is currently I have all those small sites. Operators do not speak BGP to me. Some of them like, what, BGP? No. So yeah, it might be applicable for BGP, but if it's BGP, we assume you might advertise them something, so you might have some addresses. Yeah, we can extend it to BGP, definitely. So I'm open for suggestions on the mailing list, what should be added to this draft as a use case, and what should be probably removed, I don't know.
So Warren Kumari, Google, kind of answering Fred's thing. Most implementations already do VRRP tracking. So I think this is exactly where you do all your VRRP tracking for, interface up, down, or contributing prefix. You just hook this in exactly the same place, easy done, maybe.
Dave Taylor. So I wanted to answer your question about what you do if both of your uplinks are down. Answer, you leave them both deprecated is the only correct answer. What you don't want to do is bring them both back up because that has multiple undesired effects. I'll give maybe one or two of them in case it isn't obvious to people. One of them is in all of your other diagrams, right? Anyone with a red, stop anyone with a little red broken blob on one of the uplinks. Any one of the diagrams that has a broken uplink. That one has both up. Yeah, that one's fine. Right, so you can see there, the only prefix that's changed is the one that's associated with ISP-A, right? And so the uplink there controls the preferred lifetime, right? The blue preferred lifetime is not affected by anything other than the blue uplink, right? If you start having these side effects where other things can control your metric, right, that causes one style of problems, okay? Another style of problem you mentioned is what if they're both down, I have to have an address. Well, at least these are preferred lifetimes, not valid lifetimes. You still have addresses if you're a host, they're just not preferred. So what this source address selection RFC says, it doesn't say that you can't use deprecated addresses.
Yeah.
It says that they're deprecated and you use them only when you don't have anything else, right? So the rule is avoid deprecated addresses. So if you have one that's deprecated, one that's not, doesn't matter what any of the rules are, you pick the one that's not deprecated because that's way high in the set of rules. It's like way before 5.5, right? But
oh, it's V6 only. You don't have V-tolerance. What are the? It's IPv6 working group.
My point is that if they're both deprecated, you get the same rule as if they're both not deprecated, which you go down the list, okay?
Yeah.
And so there's no advantage to putting them both back up. There's only disadvantage. So the only right answer is you leave them both deprecated.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether you're using ULAs or not. The right thing happens in both cases.
Yeah, good point. I was going to add it to the draft and I forgot.
And you hope that your outage doesn't last for 604,000 seconds.
No, because
when your battle lifetime's expired, you're gone. You don't know anything.
but we still set periodic arrays. It's not just one array I'm sending. I change the timer and I keep sending them.
Can we go to the next slide, Michael Abramson?
This.
Like what to do when you want to not use a prefix. In RFC 7084, but the home, like this, what was the residential gateway, what it should do when its WAN port goes down and it doesn't have its prefix. That kind of thing is in there. Probably we have a few years of experience on how hosts react to this event. So I think we know pretty well what to do and that should work here. HomeNet also did the same thing with the source routing. I mean, it's doing the same thing you're trying to do here. It proposed a control plane in order to do what you're trying to do here. I've played around with the HomeNet code. It did the same thing, deprecated prefixes, blah, blah, blah. I think you can look at that code, try it out, see what it's doing, see what's working. For me, it was working. I had multiple uplinks. It seemed to do the right thing. So basically, for me, this is HomeNet, but you didn't specify the control plane. So I think we have a lot of like experimentation that has been done. A lot of like there is document to look at and so on. If you want to propose a different control plane, that's fine. But But yeah, I think what to do and what to send to the host and so on is, you can find that in multiple places.
Okay.
No, okay, so 7084 at least specifies it, what happens when your WAN port goes down. So you can at least copy with pride from that one.
David Lampeter, yeah, I do indeed think that this may not be specified in a way that is applicable here. And even if it is, I think it's perfectly fine to pick it out from there and have it here as an instance.
But I'm saying, if there is prior art to look into what to do when you want to deprecate something. And there is running code to look at and see what it does.
Yeah, Lorenzo, clearly 7084 does not say this, I think. And also HomeNet also does not say this. I think it's because Ule didn't want it to say that. And I think he's wrong. But the fact is that we don't have this, I think. It does have it?
Right to lifetimes, 0.
Okay, the rest of us can't see them.
Yeah, it's L13 inside of 7084. If you go read requirement 13, it'll send out preferred lifetimes of 0 and do exactly what you're describing. The only other thing I'll add is I would put in RIOs in this too, in case in the future people actually implement RIOs, because there might be some use cases for that.
The guidance is probably whatever resource is tied to that prefix or whatever, just lifetime 0 is.
Oh, yeah, DNS, yeah.
So Dave, who was not at Mike, said some people implement them. I'd like to say that as of recently, some more people implement them. And we're waiting for even more people to implement them. David.
Okay, so do you know what you're doing with this?
I don't know if working group would like to adopt it, or they would like me to see another version with some stuff added or fix it.
Sounds like there needs to be some interaction with the HomeNet RFCs. But
Michael, I was thinking, I would really like to see more work on the control plane. Like, what are the mechanisms and so on before like, otherwise I don't, like, we can't just hand wave and say, look, do something.
Yeah, to be honest, I would like to, I intentionally kept it quite generic because like we have this thing for VRP, for example, right? We have some conditional things in routing. I advertise this route if I have another route, for example, right? I do not want to make it very specific because it depends which vendor you are using, right? How do you detect the failure? It might be vendor dependent, right? So on some vendor, you can use some built-in automation. Right now we do. If something happened, I want to change my configuration. But I would like it to be a standard feature or something vendor support.
Personally, I would like to see more before I think I want to adopt
Okay,
this.
so we'll talk offline so I can get your suggestions and put them in the document and send an updated version.
David Lampeter again. I do agree that we can look at HomeNet at what they do. I don't think that this should keep us from adopting the document, even though I agree that we really should do that. And I also disagree with Mikael. I think the interface to the routing system is perfectly clear, and that this should ask, is there a route for packets that would have this source address and this destination? And that's it. I wouldn't try to look at any interface states, at VRP states or anything, because all of those ultimately have their effect in the routing table. So just ask the routing system, can I get from here to there? And that's it.
Darren Dukes from Cisco. You've done some experimentation with this, I assume, right? And how fast is the propagation of
that's the problem, right? So currently the best thing I can do on some platforms is to play with getting config changed, right, upon event. However, that platform I was playing with also had a bug which is now supposed to be fixed, that if you change the array section of config, it's not sending array immediately sometimes. It's still waiting for this array to be, for next timer to expire. It was a bug report, it's been fixed. So it's a work in progress, and I'm trying to describe how it should be done so we can go back to vendors and tell them, please do something like that so I can implement it in my network, right? So unfortunately, I cannot tell you that I have a solution ready in my network working. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. Probably will be just configuring that stuff.
And for the network with multiple routers in them, where you don't just have a router connected directly to a host, or you've got some mid nodes like that example, did you see any propagation delay between the mid router, or is that relatively quick from what you've done, or have you been able to test that yet?
So this is propagation time of a routing protocol, right? So I have not tested this particular scenario because because this is just expanding the previous cases. I was playing with like 1 or 2 routers in the really small sites, yeah.
All right, thanks.
So I'm not ready to talk about real like measurement on how fast it's going to be, because I do not think the vendors are actually giving me what I want right now, unfortunately. So I have to do some WD-40 and sticky tape to get this done.
Pierre Plister from Cisco. I think this is a very interesting work and is useful to document it. Indeed, that's what is proposed in the CPE RFC 7084 and what is implemented in many routers. It's also what is specified in HomeNet. HomeNet routers behave the same way. They deprecate prefix when some prefix uplink is not available anymore. And just to come back to the trigger discussion, I think the routing protocol is a decent trigger to have to update that. I think we should adopt this document.
Lorenzo Colletti, I think that these bugs that you found, which make the difference between like an 80% solution and a 95% solution, are really a really good reason to get this adopted and published, because then we can say, look, here's a thing that we know how to do, and there's like these 2 tiny little bugs that stand between us and doing this type of multi-homing. Now, this doesn't fix all the problems, right? We have some remaining failure cases, but when somebody asks me, like, why does and one thing that you didn't notice is that some hosts will ignore RAs because battery life, right? So one thing that you might need to do is when something happens, you might have to send a few RAs. Yes. And that's another thing that you might have to say, hey, vendor, for time X, can you send a few RAs? And that will help a bunch of other deployments that send RAs every 3 seconds because hosts don't listen. So I think this is going to be a really good thing. And when somebody comes to me saying our device should drop 90% of multicast, I could say no, because when enterprises deploy this, it will break them. And so having this written down and adopted and possibly published is going to be really good for that purpose.
David Skenazy, Apple. Just wanted to say that I think this is really, really good work and that I support adoption.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me pose 3 questions at this point for a hum. I just want the sense of the room. I'll give you 3 options. Option number 1 is we really hate this work. We really want to not adopt it. Option number 2 is this is wonderful work. We want to adopt it now. It needs work, but we want to adopt it now. The third option is, Jen, we need for you to work on this a little bit more, develop the concept, and then we'll consider adopting it. So those 3 options. So first, who feels that this is not something that we want to be working on? Please hum. Okay, having heard that answer, or having not heard that answer, who would like to adopt it now? Please hum. Okay, who thinks Jen needs to do some additional work and then we can consider adopting it? Please hum. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. So, Dave? What's up?
I have a last comment. While we were speaking, I have hacked together an implementation of this.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I need you to post that as draft IETF, whatever, and we can talk about what the name should be. But yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so with that. And this is my talk, so he's the chair at the moment. I'm sorry? Yeah.
Aren't you supposed to stand in the box?
I'm probably supposed to. Where is that box anyway? Here, I'll go stand in front of the box. Okay, so the origin of this draft is that John Brzezowski gave a talk at a webinar run by the routing area chairs a couple of weeks ago. And one of the questions that he said that he was having trouble deploying IPv6 in his network. And one of the issues was that CPE routers don't come with IPv6 turned on by default. And so I wanted to walk through what I do or what I did at my home. What I actually had to get a Cox engineer who had played with my router in his lab to tell me, what magic tricks he got through in order to configure IPv6 on his router. So let me just walk through what I had to do. I went down to Best Buy and I bought whatever router they said was a wonderful thing. And so now when I got home, I plugged the thing in, and note that having plugged it in, IPv4 worked. IPv4 just worked. I was able to download a new image, make sure the thing had the latest software. It was configured correctly. Life happened, and IPv4 just worked. So then, using IPv4, I went to my laptop and I logged into the router. And then I had to go to the advanced configuration screen, because of course IPv6 is an advanced configuration. And then I had to go to advanced setup, which was on the next screen. And then I had to go to selecting IPv6, which was an advanced setup on the advanced screen after I had logged into the router. And then I had to go to a thing that actually had a number of different options and say, please just figure it out. And, yeah, so that thing, the thing at the upper right-hand corner that I have circled there actually says English. But what it said by the time I got to it, what it said was auto-detect. And so I felt very much for John in his, come on guys, can we make this work, please? Okay, so then we've had a little bit of a conversation about the draft that I put together, which was, come on, let's not be idiots, here's what you need to do. And Lorenzo, your comment was that we have RFC 7020, I believe, whatever it is, 7084, which says, here's a list of RFCs, please implement them. And okay, great, we've got a list of RFCs, please implement them. And they're all implemented in this router. Every single one of them, as near as I can tell, is implemented in this router. And Barbara Stark jumped in and said, well, why don't you just follow TR124? Well, so I went to TR124 and looked, and it gives me a list of RFCs. As near as I can tell, every single one of those RFCs is implemented in this router. So Barbara is about to dispute with me.
I pointed you specifically to a flow chart in an appendix that showed a flow as to the decisions to make.
General observation. I wish you luck. If you don't have a Cox engineer who has played with this in his lab, turning on IPv6 in your home using the router that I have in my home, which was the best one that I could buy from Best Buy, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think my daughter's going to do it. I don't think my wife is going to do it. It was hard for me to do it. And Garrett Daring on the list came back and said, you're not the only one that has discovered that. So there are several different ways that we can go with this, and I'm really not particularly stuck on my particular draft. Quite happy to have it go away if that's the right thing to do. I've been in a couple of different working groups and a research group this morning where people stood up and said, gee, could we somehow please tell the vendors to make your router come up just like it does with IPv4 to actually do the right thing with IPv6. The problem that I had in sitting down and figuring out what that algorithm should be was that on both sides of the router, the WAN side talking to the ISP and my home side talking to whatever else, I've got the Slack approach, I've got the DHCP approach. Xing Li told me this morning that in his network, he has to deploy separate SSIDs, one for the Android computers and one for everything else because of the difference basically between Slack and DHCP and the debate that we have in this community. And Bob Hinden's about to correct me on that. So,
no, something else.
Oh, okay. What's on your mind?
So it does vary, Bob Hinden, so it does vary. I mean, the router I have, I think I had to click one box and the rest just worked.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Some people are doing it better than others.
Somehow, I think we as a community need to communicate to the vendor community that, gee guys, it's just got to work. Now, the debate that I would suggest that we have at the mic and in the next few minutes is, what's the best way to do that? How do we achieve that?
So in this morning's MAP RG session, I mentioned this. The Ready logo obviously tests 784. One thing we do or don't do at the moment is we don't require that boxes have V6 turned on by default. We test all those wonderful RFCs you list, and boxes that get the CE router logo can do all of those. That doesn't mean they're on by default. So I think that's something that we as a logo committee, I'll probably take back based on a draft like this, is going back and making that a requirement to get the logo. Saying, look, you shouldn't put this on your box if you don't turn V6 on by default, because that's not very helpful. Years ago we didn't do it because it might cause operational issues. I think we're way past that now, so I think it's something that we should talk about.
Barbara?
I think what? Barbara Stark, what? Huh?
Tim, just for the notes, I think what you said was important. Can you say a few words about the logo that you're talking about so I can make sure it gets captured?
Yeah. So the IPv6 Ready logo is a program that's been going on since the early 2000s about the promotion of IPv6. So basically we take the base RFCs and test all the must in them, and it's a way for manufacturers to indicate that they've done a marketing program. So in this case, for 7084, we test all the musts that are requirements that are listed in that draft.
Barbara Stark. So actually, if you wanted something as simple as recommending that dual stack, just regular IPv6 be enabled by default on general purpose routers, I think that might be a very powerful statement. My disagreement was purely with the specific flow that you were suggesting because we use a different flow, and I didn't want it suggested that our flow is wrong and that flow is right.
Well, your
because
flow
they both
is wrong,
work.
isn't it?
Right. Just some additional comments. The only successful deployments with actual IPv6 traffic that you see from service providers are where service providers have provided the routers with V6 enabled on the routers and all of that. And, my theory from Lee Howard's presentation in the last V6 ops, there was that service provider that had like 100% enabled and almost no traffic. My theory is that they've got their own router, but it's a really simple one-port router, and then everybody's putting their own router behind that, and that's blocking all the V6, because other than the 0.5% of people who were apparently using V6 from that service provider, nobody enables IPv6. And that's been some of my concerns about some of these 7084 updates, by the way, is if you have this long laundry list to choose from, no user is going to be going in and selecting from the laundry list. And so either you've got something that works with dual stack and dual stack is it, or you've got something from the service provider that does it for you.
Jordi Palet. I was trying to find it, but I cannot find it right now. There is a softwires, I think, document, something like Unified CPE, which at least for the part of the different transition mechanism possibilities is allowing the the router to guess, and the communication between the router and the operator to guess what is available in the network and make it automatically on which a priority basis. So if there are even several transition mechanisms available, which one is preferred? Okay, I think at least two of the co-authors of that document are in the room, so maybe they can provide some more information. But I tried to find the document to know what is the exact status. I didn't find right now, but we can discuss that later in the list.
Lorenzo Colletti, I don't know if this document has changed since I read it, but it seemed like it was a little bit too detailed, and I'm not a fan of that, because if it's detailed, then people will read it and implement it. But instead, they should be reading 7084 and implementing that.
Well, but all 7084 says is please implement all these RFCs.
No, not at all.
And those routers actually do.
Not at all.
It
says way more than that. It says if you do this, if this happens, then you have to do that. And there's a lot of things in there that explain how not to break V6 connectivity. I was advising a team that was implementing V6 support in a home router, and they tripped up over all sorts of things. And like, okay, well, what do we do in this? What do we like? Wait, we've got an address here. Like, wait, what? We have a PD and an RA. Okay, well, which one do we use? And it's all in there. And you have to say, basically, I told them, read this RFC, implement them, and then don't launch until Tim has given you the green light. That's what I told them, and that's what they're doing. And so I think, but there are a couple of things that you're right we should do. First of all, we should say, this is, whatever, 2017, we need IPv6 to be on by default. And I think saying you can't get the IPv6 ready logo unless it's on by default is a great thing. I think that would be super useful, and whatever we can do to make that happen is helpful. And third, maybe there's some amount of work, and I'll let you, Hans talk about that, because I think, remember, once Hans built an awesome implementation that would detect if PPP was configured, it would do PPP, and if not, it would do GCP, and it would do this, and it would fall back. And I think if we had that written up, saying like, first try this, if PPP is configured, try that, if not, try this other thing, if not, try this other thing, then that might be something that is kind of like a detection mechanism. That might be useful to write up. And Hans, maybe you want to speak to that.
I just found it. It's published. It's RFC 8026, the one about the priority of what to choose. Okay, so it's there.
It's where?
RFC 8026.
Okay.
All right, Hans from D-Link. No, I don't think my UI is better, though. Yes, my UI is better because I do follow TR124, as Barbara just mentioned. There's a flow in the appendix showing that, and I consulted Lorenzo and everybody before, like a couple 5 years ago. Like, if IPv4 goes PPPoE, basically I would try that for IPv6 as well first, and if the IPv4 goes DHCP, then I would try that as well. And yeah, everything. So, however, I do agree that we should simplify it, and that is sort of like in last IETF, I was saying that I certainly don't want to have the B's mentioning about like 16.4 and the other stuff. I know it is basically the wording and everything, but I sort of doesn't want to see them in my UI, and the 406RD and DSLI can just be. I do today using the DHCP options to enable them.
Michael A. Remsen. So I did ask this on some mailing list. There were probably several people here on about if you go out to the electronics store and buy something, does it have IPv6 turned on by default? And there were people there who claimed they had multiple devices that did have this on and it worked. And I think this is true for like native, like just IP over Ethernet and PD, but then I've heard about all kinds of special deployment scenarios where you have two PPPoE sessions, one for V4 and one for V6, and like I think there is a lot of things out there that makes it really hard for someone trying to implement this as a generic mechanism to work in. I wanted this to work in 99.9% of operators and just plug it in and it goes. That could be really hard, but at least we could perhaps identify the most common case is that where it should just work automatically out of the box. And so I don't know if we should start by if people can just share what different scenarios that ISPs typically do and what the gateways would need to support. In Sweden, there are a few providers that supply the residential gateway. Like 99% of them run them, the way the ISP provided them. When they have IPv6 enabled, it'll be great. There are others where people are basically buying them in the electronics store. That will be a completely different story. So I think this is important work.
Victor.
Yeah, Victor Coursing. So pretty much agree with most of the commenters. I think this is probably the next step. As most people said, ISPs who deploy their routers, they'll turn it on when they turn it on. I think my sample size is small, but of the folks that we helped up north with off-the-shelf boxes, I have never saw a router that configured itself to do dual stack on its own. You had to do some advanced configuration, at least go through a couple of menus. So I think it's important work. I think it's, to get to that, I think dual stack. I would prefer personally to keep it as simple as possible. Maybe.
Well, I could reduce the whole thing to one sentence if you prefer.
Well,
so if you turn on IPv4 by default, turn on IPv6 by default.
Yeah, what I meant was simplicity in terms of, I know there's a lot of options and then maybe there's a lot of transition technologies. Potentially, if we can avoid having to, if there's probably, if there's transition technology being used, potentially that's more of an advanced setup anyway. And we, they're trying to figure out how we simplify this because, the comment was made yesterday in the plenary, right? We got to start thinking things in terms of how do we get that consumer space to actually get on, how do we help the consumer space? I think there's one good way. Keep it as simple as possible and try to achieve goals, and we can iterate from there. So if we try to go in day one and say, okay, here's a large complex way of rattling through everything, and we make the implementation complex, I'm just concerned that might potentially do more harm than good, right? I know. And then I think the idea that was mentioned is maybe, talk to some of the operators and figure out what are if a router shows up behind what you've deployed, what does that look like? What are some of those basic pieces look like? Maybe that's some other document that sits beside this or something, because that'll go a long way. I mean, for example, in the cable space, you typically use a router that the provider gives you or goes into bridge mode. It's very, very clear what those two things look like, and that can be documented pretty clearly.
So, Michael Abrams, wasn't there someone who invented, had 700 people report what their provider IPv6, how it was provisioned? Anyone remember? Yes. Yeah, that was you, right? That's why I was looking at you. You were all overwhelmed. You should probably get them.
I got something like 1,500 responses from different ISPs worldwide. So there is a lot of information there, yeah.
Hey, Fred, John Brzezowski. So two things. So one comment about what Barbara said. I know for a fact that people will take our gateway and they'll plug in like an SRX, an ASA, like small businesses or home businesses. So one of the things that we've been looking at is working with all the implementers in that space to get V6 right and working and on by default. That's been at least a 3-year journey so far. The other thing about if you're going to open the hood here for whatever the reference to 7084 is, you might as well work on, add to the list, what happens when the gateway doesn't get an IPv4 address, right? That's coming to a theater near you, and if this round of this takes as long as the last time took, by the time, this is, it should be perfectly timed, right? So for example, one of the things that we worked on years ago is if you don't send a V4 address, I know there's some gateways that would blink lights at you and stuff like that, and may or may not work, right? So it's probably something good to put in there, just thinking ahead.
Michael Abrams again, so this just struck me that I've said in other places, people will hook up something behind the ISP provider NAT box. If the provided NAT box doesn't support sub PD, the users behind that device will never get IPv6. So I don't think in 7084, right, Barbara? 7084 doesn't have sub PD to. It does now. Okay, so we did that. So the residential gateway, can it do PD to other devices in the home? Okay, that is in there. Okay. Okay, so it's a should. Because I think that's actually something that we could do and bring that in. Okay, I guess we can't make it a well. Okay, it would be good if more devices did that and had recommendations to operators to support that. Because then at least, even though it's a double NAT4.4, IPv6 is still, works to devices, even if people double stack their routers in the home.
Joel Yeagley. I actually kind of disagree with that last statement. There are several CPE devices that will happily bridge under the circumstances. So if they got a /64 on the outside, you'll get one on the inside. Now that's not the configuration that I would prefer as a user, but they do that. Also, we did have a gentleman from D-Link up here, and having used several of his products with native v6 support since 2011, as far as I can tell, all of the ones currently in the marketplace, I think there are 31 of them, have this enabled by default. So that's a pretty large population of devices. I don't know how many he's sold, but I assume it's in the millions, since they have enough margin to send people here, and they cost like $40 each. So it's certainly possible for vendors to do this. Like I am at the point where I can go to Fry's, buy something on the end cap, and get v6 in my house. Now, I wouldn't guarantee that anything that I bought at Fry's would give me v6. I think sometimes the thing on the end cap is a crock pot. But certainly those devices do exist. And I think it would be good to encourage vendors to do that generally. But I think it's certainly possible to get there.
Barbara Stark, so just a comment about the IAPD. As a service provider, ours does IAPD, but that's because we know ours is at the edge. One of the reasons we did not, or I did not want to make it a must in 7084 is because out of deference to what HomeNet was working on with HNCP as possibly being the preferred mechanism of distributing prefixes, delegating prefixes around a home network. And so that's why it turned out to just be a should.
Okay, so not quite sure the way forward, if there is even a way forward. I could reduce this draft to one sentence. Would people like me to do that?
I mean, I'd like to see something really simple of, can we recommend...
One sentence might be simple.
Yeah, can we recommend, IPv6 dual stack enabled or native enabled by default? And, maybe we need to define what we mean by native, but we should know what we mean by native, but...
Yeah.
Mark Townsley. One of the reasons that the D-Link product line has IPv6 enabled by default, and at the time, before Cisco sold it off to Belkin, the Linksys products did as well. Maybe even some Netgears, I don't remember all the whole list, is that we involved them in the world launch in 2011. There were 3 sets of targets of people, of groups or companies involved, ISPs, content providers, and consumer router vendors. So it worked some, and I think the things that you can do that maybe the Internet Society could do, again, maybe around the next June 6th or something, to raise awareness, what have you, coupled with things like the offer to add the default into the Ready Logo program that was mentioned earlier. Those kinds of outreach things will do a lot more than get another RFC saying, please do IPv6 and do it this way.
Well, absolutely. But on the other hand, the V6 Ready Logo program is based on node requirements.
Okay, fair. If you need this to do that.
Update to node requirements, I don't know.
Yeah. If you need this to do that, but
we're doing
the that is the better, I think, is the more important.
Right. Okay, Michael, and at that point, I'll close.
Michael Abrams said, it just struck me that there's one other, I don't know if it's a failure scenario, but it was a pretty common device, like 5 years old. You set it to automatic, and there was nothing on the V6 on the WAN. It basically did nothing. disabled IPv6, and it turned on 64 and gave me a 64 RA on the LAN.
Okay.
I don't know if there was anything like that we should discourage people from doing if that's needed, but that we could put into this as well.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you.
Jordy?
Actually, while talking about this, I realized that one possible addition to RFC 7084 is referring to the one I mentioned, 8026, as probably something that should be by default in any IPv6 gateway, right? Okay, very quickly, I did a single presentation for all the documents because at the end, everything is about the same. So first, let's look at what we have done since Chicago. This is the 5th version of this update to 7084. I put in different colors so that people can identify quickly if they have not read the draft recently what it has been done. So we have in a red color what is completely new from the actual RFC 7084. So we have the support for HomeNet, the text regarding the usage scenarios, and the support for IPv4 multicast continuity in LANs for things like IPTV, okay? Then in orange is what has been updated, and there is new text. So that's basically the part about the support for different transition, both IPv4 as a service and IPv6 as a service. And then the rest is basically updating the text, and that's it. I don't think I missed anything as a summary of what has been done up to now. The main issue that has been discussed in the list, and I think is the only open issue if we decide to keep going in this direction, is the shoot for the implementation of DNS proxy as described on RFC 5625. I decided not to keep going with the discussion until we decide what we do with this document, because the overall discussion was more relevant to we go into this direction of a single document, or we want to split it as I actually did. So this is the discussion that we have already in Chicago. It was, do we want a single document, which is the actual 7084, plus the changes that I have suggested it, and I understood from Chicago that the consensus was clear. The people wanted to adopt as a working group item, and I got some comments, both in private and in the mailing list, and this is what we are here. I want to remind something that I put in the Chicago slides, is that this is the reality check, right? We don't have any more IPv4 addresses, and this is the router that, from my perspective, and I think a lot of people share that, we will need for the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so it's easy to say we want an IPv6 only router, but that's not going to work today, because the people still have a lot of devices inside their local area networks that require some kind of IPv6 support. Let's call it IPv4 support. Let's call it IPv4 as a service. Okay, so that was the basic idea for me to work on this document, and the reason to require support for this kind of transition mechanism. So we have, again, this question. Do we want the actual document, including the transition support, or we want to have a document which more complete support for transition mechanisms, or we want to go back to the previous version of the RFC 7084, which was the 6204, which didn't have support for IPv6 transition, okay? So that's the thing. And I believe we have different choices. I tried to make it short. So the first one will be, and this is one of my actual documents, a very minimum set of real IPv6 only requirements, okay? I think this is basically the actual RFC 7084 without any IPv4 support and without any transition support, okay? I agree that this is something that we are going to need in the future, but as I just said, I don't think it's the real short or medium term. It's not something that the people will ask in general, except for cases of IPv6 only networks. So for example, if you are deploying small networks only for sensors with EOT or things like that, then yeah, maybe this router is a bit cheaper and it makes sense to have this one. Second choice is having a basic requirements customer edge router, including support for HomeNet. Why? And this is something that we had commented actually in the previous talk, because it may happen, and it's very common, that the customers put another router behind the one that the ISP is providing. And yes, we have the discussion about is that in bridge mode or router mode, but well, having support for HCNP can solve at least the problem of delegating, having different routers in the same network after the one provided by the ISP. So this is the second document that I submitted. The names I give to these documents are strange probably, but I wanted to make it like very clear what is each one, right? Okay, we have other choices that I have not documented. I don't believe in those choices, but maybe some people would like to go to that. The first one will be doing both. I mean, both things I mentioned before, which is a real IPv6 only router and an IPv6 only router which home network support. Okay, so these are two possibilities. So we can make that as a single option and work in both directions. Another one will be the actual RFC 7084 without any transition support, which basically is going back to 60, I don't remember the number. It was 6204, okay? And then if we go for this path, we need an additional document, which I also submitted for the transition part, okay? So basically we have keep going with our decision in Chicago. So it's updating 7084 with the transition support and HomeNet, or splitting it in different documents, one for transition and one or several for the basic CPs. So I'm not sure if you want to go for some discussion or doing a kind of poll, or you want to do this poll in the list, if you like it or not. I mean, yeah, it's up to you.
Well, if I were to suggest that people come to the mic, would it get crowded? Yeah. What happens next? Barbara?
I mean, my suggestion is, it seems like you need a document for transition support. Mainly, you're interested in transition support of tunneling IPv4 over IPv6, right? So, I mean, you could have transition support that includes 6RD or not. I really don't care. I think you might actually be more powerful with your just focus on your tunneling stuff. I don't care.
So you mean basically IPv4 as a service? You mean?
You can, if you want to call it that way. I think of it more as tunneling IPv4 over IPv6, but okay.
Okay.
I don't know that you necessarily have to touch 7084. I mean, I could understand, I guess, why you would want to. my concern is that every time we change these darned RFC numbers, it's, just for the sake of, hey, we want to change a word, okay, we're going to update the RFC number. That's just really annoying. I don't think 7084 is broken. We've got, ultimately what 7084 led to is the CE router certification stuff, which does not test the transition technologies because they are only should. It does test the Solmax RT, which, every time you talk, I realize your slides expressed it purely as taking things out of 7084, but when you talk about rolling back to 60, whatever that number was, that just really against me, because...
I know what you mean. I don't want to take out
Right.
that text. It's a quick way to say that, but you're right.
Right.
It may be confusing.
Don't say that. Okay, so anyway, those are just my thoughts that I really wish you would just focus on maybe having a document for tunneling IPv4 over IPv6. And here are the ways, and I looked at, the new RFC 8026 that you were mentioning, and probably include that along with it. That might be valuable, and that's something to think about.
Surprised. No more comments?
I'm not sure based on that input that we have an output.
We can make the poll here if the people really understood
I
my
think they
previous
understand the
slides,
issues,
or go to the list.
I
or
think they understand the issues.
Bring discussion to the list.
Tim Winters, just so I understand, you guys are basically just suggesting no other changes other than the transition mechanisms to 7084. Is that true?
Well, there are some others. If you look again to the first slide.
Yeah, but they're
HomeNet support.
Yeah, well, okay, so HomeNet support is a should, maybe. As Barbara points out, right, I don't see anyone ever coming to me asking for testing of transition mechanisms, and most of that's due to they're dependent on the individual service provider and how they're doing it. So there's no generic stuff for that. But the only other thing I would add here, and something that we might want to talk about as a group, is BCP 38 got downgraded between 6204 and 7084. And that might be something that we might want to talk about going back to making that a must for spoofing. And that might be interesting. That is what he said, but in this case I'm talking about there's literally one sentence, S2. If you read, there's a little note in there that said this was a must in 6204, but we backed it up to a should. I think BCP 38 might be important, especially with malware, these attacks that are going on. It might be something to actually talk about if that's what we want to, that's a change that might be worth doing. The rest of the stuff, HNCP is a should. I think vendors are going to do that when they want to do it. I don't think this document is going to change CP vendors implementing.
Remember, I think I must remember the reason for this update that I explained it in Chicago, and I think the consensus was overwhelming, is because RFC 7084 has support only for 6RD and DS Lite, there are many small and medium ISPs which go to the market and cannot get the right CPE with the proper support that they need for today transition mechanisms. So that's the real important part for me to update this document.
I understand that, but I got to be completely honest. We listed 6RD and all the DS Lite, and not a whole lot of guys implement it. Putting that in the 7084 document is not going to change those routers. What's going to change them is service providers having to tell them. Well, that's been our experience up till this point, at least. I'm not saying it won't change, but up till now, that hasn't made a difference. I think I'm definitely in line with Barbara in that I think it should be a separate transition document that doesn't touch 7084. I think there are things in 7084 if people want to touch them.
The reality is that if you look at the products in the market, they have support for 6RD and DS Lite, which is what is specified in 7084.
I guess I disagree with you a little bit there. I would say the stuff that we've seen at the lab is all over the map when it comes to transition mechanisms. And in particular, what gets sold off the shelf. right? It's very different coming from a service provider, right? We're not talking about those guys. We're talking about the ones that you buy off a shelf. It is the wild, wild west of just about anything. So I don't think this document's going to change that.
Michael Abrahamson, so I think I'm also agree with Barbara here that if we're going to put in a lot of transition mechanisms, it would be good to call that document transition mechanisms for IPv4 as a service on a residential CP or something. Because then it would have been nice to take T-Slide out of 7084, but I don't think we should touch it because of that. But it would mean all these new transition mechanisms go into a separate document who can focus on that, and people who need that can go with these two documents as a pair and say, look, I want this. And I think it would be a lot easier for you to progress this draft if the focus is on that and you're not touching other documents, because then you're opening Pandora's box and all kinds of things pop out and we want to discuss and change and so on. So I think it would be a more focused draft on doing that. I don't know, do we? Okay, so that, never mind.
Okay, so I think you got the outcome there.
Yeah.
So
Blue sheets?
Blue sheets. Who has the blue sheets?
We'll pay ransom for blue sheets.
You'll pay. Okay, so with that, we're adjourned, I guess. Okay, thank you.
Who has the blue sheets?
I do too.